Well, let's get back to our class. Uh, I tried to bring us back to what I think is what the Republic is all about, and it seems to be what Plato thinks also. And so I put this question to you, uh, whether the Republic has helped you to understand more about what a good life is or not. And as I said in my note, you don't have to say that it was wonderful. You don't have to say it was successful. If you think it wasn't helpful in that way, tell us about it. And if you think it was, tell us about that too. So it's a hard question and a very personal one, and I hope you don't mind my phrasing it that way. But I'm really curious about whether Plato's Republic has worked for you.
All I could say, Forrest, is that I feel like if I would have ended up as either a laborer or a soldier in Plato's Republic. And I'm not sure I'd have been happy with either of those, nor would I have performed them particularly well. But I was really a little disturbed by the Republic, which, as I just mentioned, I was supposed to read 52 years ago, but didn't. And it seemed to me very undemocratic, a little bit of a cross between 1984 and Brave New World. So that was my impression.
Well, in response to that, I found it, there were moments like that, Lance, where I felt like I was being pushed around a lot by Mr. Plato and Socrates. And I wrote my margins, going back through the book, I realized in response to Forrest's question, yes, I have definitely gained insights into what is a good life. But what I find I've shoehorned out of my marginalia and is a list of characteristics. And I haven't sorted them into any kind of workable matrix for utility. But I'm sort of fooling around with that. But the one that here they are, discipline versus indiscipline, courage versus cowardice, intelligence versus stupidity, diligence versus laziness, health versus unhealth, happiness versus unhappiness, goodness versus badness, wisdom versus etc. But the list goes on, and I couldn't make it complete. But what I realized was missing as an explicit criteria into the good life was effort. Help me on that, because it seems to me that going back to the diligence and lazy criteria, diligence, discipline, courage, et cetera, keeping an open mind, all require some component of effort, that is motivation, which to me was my distilled shorthand for my major insight into the good life, which is keep at it, baby. Anyway, that's I'm still working on it, and I'm still distilling, and it's fun to go through and see what I marked up as I read. Painfully, I must admit, it was not a happy experience. It was my first experience, but I loved making the lists. There you go. That's effort, but it's actually so I'm going to distill it and carry it in my wallet.
My read, my response to the question you raised for us is threefold. At the end, I think Plato makes an argument that there is a next life and a heavenly authority that recommends the hard work of being good and ethical and principled and dealing with people on that basis. And it's the argument that if you don't have the capacity to deal at that level, you are damned to this recycling of existences, the integration of soul and body, that puts you into a diminished state, a less perfect and less, what shall I say, satisfactory state. So one is an argument that's theological, as it were. I'm kind of amazed that he brought that in at the end. But there are two other arguments. The one, of course, has to do with the argument with regard to statecraft and state creation, and the way to disseminate good and to improve the circumstances of the community around you. And that is done, again, individuals are able to operate at this very high level of ethical and principled behavior. And the other argument has to do with psychology. It has to do with fulfillment and happiness and unhappiness. The most dramatic aspect of that has to do with the contrast between the tyrannical personality and the person who is brought up in democracy, or even better, in a philosopher king-dominated kingdom, and the contrast is between souls that are internally distressed and distorted, and always aggrieved, and are dissonant, separated themselves from themselves, and always aspiring for more and wanting more, and not trusting and not able to be fully functional internally. So it's this almost Freudian argument that when we emerge from our sleepless nights, from our dreams that are filled with contradictions, if we have a clear spirit, we're able to deal with these demons that emerge in our own subconsciousness or not. So there are three basic arguments: one philosophical, one political or sociological, and the third theocratic or religious. And I'm impressed and influenced by all three. I think the combination is pretty potent. And I'm resolved not to tell any more lies, not to drink any more gin, and to take more philosophy lessons. I think there's also this. I mean, there's the drama, the drama of Plato influencing his interlocutors, and in particular, his influence on his stepbrother. I guess that's his relationship of what's his name, Glaucum. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Help me. Anyway, that is an incredibly influential relationship. I mean, Glaucum comes from being pretty cynical and actually a little inspired by the worst of political regimes and the worst of political philosophies, to being completely converted and understanding the benefits and the rectitude of a higher and more moral and principled life. And so we have that dramatic guidance along the way as well, not just the theoretical arguments, but their influence and their working out through the interplay between those two, between Socrates himself and his brother or stepbrother.
Okay,
Okay, excuse me.
I think that
that-
Stanley wants to say something.
I do. Based on what you just said, one of your three things about sociological, I mentioned it was a few lectures back, this book. Nobody commented afterwards, but I'm going to mention it again because it keeps coming up. It's called The Good Life. That's what you're talking about.
Yes.
It's Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study on Happiness. That's the name of the book. And it's by a Harvard physician. And it's 80-year studies, still going on. And I found it fascinating reading a few months ago when it came out. But now, having listened to these discussions, I find it even more fascinating. And it might be on a simpler level, but the interviews of the people starting 80 years ago, their siblings, their grandkids, and the one thing, and I mentioned this a few lectures ago, the main thing that came out that made for a good life and a happy life, and I imagine all the philosophy of Plato is in there somewhere, was having friends. And I just wanted to know how that even, sounds, or what you think of that just concept. Because it came,
Yeah.
it's a well worth reading book. I can only tell you that. They talk about what you're talking about, the morals and being honest, and basically what good friends are throughout life will make for a happy and a good life. And that was the prime. And I've asked friends of mine, and some of them have come up with the answer immediately. They said friends. So I just, maybe a couple comments, maybe just for my own edification.
Well,
Yeah.
we might
go ahead, Richard.
tweak that just a.
Yeah.
We might tweak that a bit by saying, maybe not limiting it to friends, but talking about relationships. We are social animals. We live we don't live in isolation, and so finding satisfaction and happiness in relationships, family and friends, I suppose for most of us is a version of the good life. I've got a couple of other thoughts though that I'd like to just throw out. For me, the frustration, and maybe others feel this too, in reading Plato, as stimulating and enjoyable as it is the question I always have and had at the beginning and had at the end. Okay, how do I operationalize this? I'm not a philosopher king, and no one is training me to be a philosopher king. And we don't live in Plato's Republic. Neither did Plato, neither did Socrates. It's never existed. And so we have to somehow take what he has to say about life and apply it to a very different to the world in which we live. Well, of course, he that's what he's urging his students to do all the time. And I guess this, going along with the idea that he doesn't give us answers, is my conclusion that that happiness or the good life is not a result; it's a process. It's a search. It's an effort, as Charlie said, as someone said, effort, Charlie, to realize something larger, more satisfying, more fulfilling than what we have at the moment. And frankly, I find all of the language, truth, knowledge, beauty, the ideal, I can't distinguish among those things. I can't keep them separate in my head. They're abstract. I'm comfortable in the world of abstraction, but these abstractions don't help me very much. But certainly the idea that the good life is a process rather than a result appeals to me. I'd like a lot of people, I suppose, maybe some of you. I was born into a fairly religious atmosphere, Catholicism. And so I was spoon-fed from a very early age a formula for morality, happiness, the good life. The good life was all about getting ready for the real good life to follow. Everything we did was really, recorded on a tally sheet that would eventually determine whether we made it through the pearly gates or were consigned to something else. And of course, I've left that far behind, I'd like to think, but replacing that concept of morality as a test that you pass in order to go on to something else is, I think, my life challenge. It's not somewhere else. It's here that I will realize whatever it is that life offers. That seems simple, and to people who perhaps don't have the burden of my background, maybe it sounds very simple. But anyway, for me, it's that process notion, working toward something that is perhaps unachievable, but is worth pursuing.
I'd like to interrupt just a moment to get back to Stanley's question. I don't think that the Plato talks about friendship very much. In fact, I can't offhand think of any reference. We do see in the Crito, in the death scene of Phaedo and Crito both, when Socrates is in jail waiting to be executed or drink the hemlock, he is surrounded by friends. And in the Republic, Glaucon and Adeimantus are friends of his, and so are the others. So by implication, Socrates has friends, but he doesn't. But I don't think that we find him Plato writing about that. We do find it in Aristotle. Aristotle has some lovely things to say about the importance of friendship. And Charlie would tell us that Seneca does too, as an essay on friendship. So we do have other philosophers who take up that, very important topic.
Thank you, Forrest, for commenting on that. I appreciate that.
Okay.
And that's what the dogs have to say, right?
Morris, going back to your original question, I found, and maybe this is because I had too much academic training in philosophy which sometimes gets in the way of enjoying reading. I found the Republic to be, I could not emotionally get involved in that book. I read it as an academic thesis about this idealism, the utopia of the philosopher king. I read it, the issues of forms, the issues of ethics and what a good life is. And as one of our colleagues said, I couldn't distinguish in my mind between the good and the knowledge and all the various concepts that I guess Plato felt were very clear in his mind. To me, it all got very befuddled. It was not an emotionally powerful book to me. I guess, unlike reading a book about happiness, which relates to, I've read some philosophy that is emotionally powerful. I'm not totally cursed to be an academic, but I don't know, the book was just very dry, and really the authoritarianism was a real turnoff to me. I know historically Athens was a mess, and Plato was angry about Athens being a mess, but but his utopia to me is a really step too far.
But
So
it's a utopia. I don't know whether, I guess we're going to talk about it. And Forrest mentioned it in his emails to us. The lack of poetry, drama, and other arts, I mean, I found very disturbing. It just seemed not the kind of society in which I would want to live. Um, I don't know where exactly that came from or what the point of that is. He seemed to, I guess, say that if you do listen to this drama and read this poetry, you are getting a wrong impression of what the reality of the true form is. But it rang very hollow in my mind. I'm just wondering what others think of that.
well, it's the coldness. I mean, as I say, it was. I agree. I mean, if you live in Easton, one of the great things about living in Easton is we have a wonderful arts community here,
That's true.
and I use a lot. We have a literature group here. We have a wonderful museum. We have very enriching opportunities, and I don't feel that I don't feel like Plato that's leading me astray.
It struck me too as a little bit pre Marshall McLuhan, where the media is the massage. He seemed to take that to its nth and last degree. Yeah, just not something that I could embrace.
Forrest,
I'd like to just, oh, excuse me.
Well, on that topic of the arts, I'm a little confused because it mentions that these are unnecessary and dispensable, but I thought I read somewhere that the arts were indeed important, sculpture and painting, because it reflected that which could be beautiful, and therefore, in striving for beauty and truth and nature, that the arts contributed to that concept. And so to hear more and to read more about how that's dispensable and not necessary and relative to the bigger cause is a little bit confusing. Did I not read somewhere that the arts were important because of their reflection of beauty?
They certainly were. When you think of what appears in the Greek temples, what we have left of that, including the items stolen by Lord Elgin and put in the British Museum, clearly they wanted their temples to be beautiful. They wanted them to be impressive. And their statues, the statues in the 5th century, this changed afterwards, but in the 5th century, the models of the men and women are all of beautiful, beautiful young men and young women. They didn't portray old folks until the century afterwards. And one other thing I'd like to point out, it's hard to know how serious Plato is about that whole business of what he says about paintings and sculptures and so on, and tragedies and the plays, because Socrates, the character, and that's Plato, of course, writing, he knows Homer so well that he can just recite line by line. He knows the plays of Aeschylus and the plays of Sophocles, not mentioned as much as Aeschylus. And so he's very versed in the things that he ends up in that passage condemning. And so it's hard to figure out just what he's doing there.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it that,
Please.
if we remember that Plato has constructed this ideal place, community, more as an allegory, as a teaching tool or thought experiment or whatever, that his real interest is in personal morality. I think logically, what he has to say about literature or about poetry goes along with the ideal state that he's constructed. There is a logic to it. It makes sense, but if we conclude that that's not really what Republic is all about, that this is really an examination of the individual psyche, then I don't find myself taking it very seriously. You know, I can't take it very seriously because it defies my experience and all of our experience in the real world. What is the matter with representation of beauty? What's wrong with that? Particularly if none of us is ever really going to achieve a perfect understanding of beauty. What is wrong with exposing ourselves to imperfect representations of it? I can't, I mean, doesn't that get us somewhere down that road?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think there, I'm sorry, go ahead, Tony.
I think, Adrian, you've been wanting to say something, Adrian?
Well, I'm interested in the thread through all of the comments that are very, very interesting. I think it was Michael that mentioned about getting into the book. I had a hard time too, but I had to shift my thinking back to the college days where reading wasn't for fun. It was to teach you how to think. And once I got that switched around in my mind, I found the reading very, very interesting and much better. And I also had just finished reading the Book of Joy by the Dalai Lama and Desmond Tutu, and there's a lot of things there that I could pull out from the Book of Joy and how to be happy and what is joy and how is it measured. And I think the same thing here is with life, especially in the myth of I guess Plato said, we should always keep to the upward path and we should use every means at our disposal to act morally and with intelligence so that we may gain our own and the God's approval, not only during our stay here on earth, but also when we collect the prizes our morality has earned us. So I think somebody else said work, or effort. And that's what I got out of the meaning of the book. It's all important. Morality is important. People have different opinions of morality. They interpret it in different ways and judgments. So learning how to find your own morality and proceed in life with the effort to gain the most that you possibly can out of life, that's what gets you to the happiness and the joy. So it's, I think it's been said in different ways by a lot of different people, but I've enjoyed this very, very much.
May I just thank you for that isolated reference to the words, if I understood you correctly, keep to the upward path.
Yes.
Okay, well, that conflates with Richard's, how do I make this operational? Certainly relates to my own comments about effort. And you've nailed it for me in terms of finding a little, also the word process, Richard talked about that. So one, it's a keep to the upward path. If those, I'll find the page reference somehow.
Page 379.
Right at the end.
Page
Okay.
379.
Right at the end.
That is so helpful to me in terms of encapsulating, if you will, some of the things we're saying. So I really appreciate it.
I thought so too. That did the same for me, Charles.
So Forrest,
I
was just going to add in reply to Adrian's thoughts. right before I received your last email on the unfinished subject, which is kind of what everybody is referring to, that it's onward going. And I jotted down a few notes right before in answer to your question about what we got out of the course. And I'd like to share them. It's very brief. One cannot escape the provocative and thought-inspiring nature of the Republic, whether some of it might have been revolting to us or not fun to read. If only I had read this in my college years. If I recall when during the roaring 60s, when so many were marching against the war in Washington, many of the intellectuals were espousing comments and remarks about the Greek philosophers. And now, as I think back on those days, it all is much more meaningful. By the way, I've loved this. No doubt the impact of the Republic would have influenced much of what came into play throughout my life experience. I mentioned how easy it is to stray off course with each of Socrates' revolutionary ideas in both governance and human behavior. Inconsistencies exist on every level. Everything doesn't fit into an idealistic mold. Socrates would tend to eliminate the deviances. But this isn't the point, as Forrest reminded me. Levels of morality and immorality vary. Levels of truth and justice vary. Human behavior is not perfect. The perfect state, the perfectly moral citizen, a standard to strive for. And as Woodward and Bernstein said in All the President's Men, they were striving for the best obtainable version of the truth. Socrates' city-state, with its hierarchy of philosopher kings, commands that all elements and citizens fall into correlating slots, all elements, of course, being perfect. And the imperfect, those physically or mentally inferior, or those within the caves, can be rescued or banished. Since human behavior is not a perfect or is an imperfect science, freedoms enjoyed in a perfect state or a democracy can disintegrate into tyranny. As per your question, has this helped me gain insight into what is a good life? I would say in reflection, I've considered right and wrong throughout my life, and while it may have to do with what it takes to live peacefully in a society and the sacrifices you make to reach that goal for the cause of the state, it really has more to do with one's sense of oneself, the kind of person one wants to be, whether you're going to be kind or humble. And that will be your outlook on the world around you. Those are my answer.
Excellent.
Well
I also thought, and this is just a personal note here, but judgment, I think, is a very important part of this too, and judging others on their morality or immorality. I think that's a very, very dangerous area to get into, because, you know, who makes us the king of that definition? My father always used to say to me, I came home from school once in 6th grade, which is absolutely the worst time. And there was a new girl in the class, I'm sorry, that was just a real bully. And I came back and I was complaining to my dad about, you know, how I didn't like her. And she'd been there for 2 days at that point. And he sat me down and he said, well, what does she do? And I told him the whole story of how terrible this girl is. And he said, Adrian, he said, I want to tell you something. Everybody has a story. And the story here is, I don't like that man. I'll have to get to know him. And that made such an impact on me, on judgment and morality. Is my morality the only morality? What's her story? How deeply has she been hurt? And I found out later that she really had. I did get to know her, and I still don't like her, but at least I got to know her. I just wanted to share that.
Judge ye not, lest ye be judged.
I'd like to come back to Ron talking about the third the third uh, the third argument of theocracy, we do end up in this work with this story, the myth of about the afterlife, and that's going to be the place of our reward or punishment. And in all the reading that I've done about Plato by various people, they all seem to agree that Plato believed in this reincarnation myth that he really got from the Pythagoreans. But I don't find anybody really challenging that. But it has seemed strange to me because in my reading of a number of dialogues, Plato tells different stories about the afterlife. I mean, he really makes up quite different stories. And so it always made it very hard for me. And you know, I came into this late and I never had a course on Plato, but it seemed to me that there was a kind of playfulness by Plato about the story of the afterlife. And then in one of the dialogues, I think it's the Theaetetus, when he was asked by one of the characters, well, what about these bad people, you know, who end up being successful and rich and so on, and what sort of punishment do they get? And Socrates says, their punishment is the life that they lead. And that has always seemed to me so beautiful, that the life that we lead is our reward or our punishment. And who would want to be, put in whoever you want to there, who would want to be that person? Who would want to be that person? Wouldn't you rather be, if you had to be somebody other than yourself, wouldn't you like to be some good person that you know or know about? And wouldn't it be awful to be living the life of some bad person? And that has kind of salvaged my view of Plato and the afterlife.
But you know, in Plato's afterlife, if you keep getting reincarnated, frequently reincarnated, then how much can you enjoy that afterlife which you've earned because you're back on Earth trying to live as a human being? It just seems like a very short kind of reward.
Well, but in that story that he tells there, when you come back, you choose your next life. And if you have led already a relatively good life, then you are going to choose another good life. If you have led a pretty bad life, you're going to choose to be a snake, or you're going to choose to be a tyrant.
I think we also come back to see if we can improve on our first life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you've lived a bad life, you're in this story, you're going to make bad choices for when you come back. So you do get a reward in another life.
But Forrest, didn't we learn in the Meno that everybody has the knowledge to lead a good life if they can only go through a dialogue that helps them to recall
Yes.
what it is that's good, and then he didn't equates knowledge with virtue, you know, and it reminds me of the aphorism, virtue is its own reward. But
yeah, but then you know, there are a lot of people who don't even think that way. They have the potential, like in that dialogue, Anytus, it engages with Socrates for a short time, and then he goes off, and Anytus is going to be one of the people who put Socrates on trial. Well, Anytus or Anytus is he's never going to get there. So a lot of people have the potential. Everyone practically has the potential, but as we know from this dialogue, very, very few make it. We here are among the few.
I think I also think there are roadblocks to morality, and a lot of it has to do with circumstances. There are some very morally sound people that do immoral things out of circumstance, necessity, feeding their family, surviving. So it's very, very difficult, I think, to separate. And in this, it really tries to help us. It's the onward and upward pull. But sometimes it's very, very hard to choose morality when your circumstances just won't allow it, or you feel as though they just won't allow it.
Good point.
Yeah, as Tony said, some people are born in ways that make this impossible. And think of the refugees today, all over the world. They're not going to be thinking of what the good life is. They're going to be trying desperately to save their life and the life of their loved ones, and then to feed them. And that's all that they're going to be able to think about.
It's not only the low mimetic characters who are. It's not only low mimetic characters who are constrained by their circumstances that limit their choices and their ability to ascend this moral ladder. It's also the heroes. It's the people who come out of Homer, who come out of the Poetics, who come out of Greek traditions of various kinds. These people in this myth of make bad decisions. They aspire to be eagles, to be whatever, or they fall even further and become snakes and vermin. So the choices that they make, of course, are conditioned by their education and their elevation and their moral discernment capacity, as the myth is laid out. So this myth is the capstone. It comes full circle. It's another argument for moral elevation, but it's also an exclamation point with regard to Plato's attack on the other source of moral principle, which is poesy, which is Homer. I mean, he may love Homer, and he says as much. He loves the beauty, but the examples and the moral education that emerges from imitating heroes and heroic acts is insufficient to this elevation. And the last myth of is an exclamation point to that, on top of that lesson.
Interesting. I don't think it's all so interesting. My mind's going in many different directions, but in the end, asking the question about, does being moral make people happy? Which I really want the answer to, but I'm guessing here that it doesn't, because being moral is really hard work. And then this stream, that thread that we've talked about a little bit, going back to effort, the effort to resist things that you don't believe are right, that are clearly wrong, that takes a lot of hard work, and the messages we've received all along the way. As a former Catholic, I got some awful messages from that upbringing. Those people that taught me were not good people. I think they were immoral, and they're supposed to be up on the high ground. And so it's hard work these days to be moral. If you want to think that those people are the happiest ones, I'm not sure that they are.
Does it depend upon what is meant by being happy?
I think the discussion about the tyrant at the end
Upward
of,
path, not a downward
I'm
path.
sorry. Is that an echo or is that someone else? Please, I defer. Anyway, the discourse at the end, I think, of book 8, where it describes the psychology of the tyrant. The worst of tyrants, who's the tyrant who actually controls the community, controls the polis, is incredibly informative and deeply psychological. Here he describes a soul which is at war with itself, which is full of anxiety and fear and an inability to enjoy or celebrate anything, because it's always under assault. It's always in an attack mode. It's always trying to reconcile fundamental differences. It controls people, subordinates that it doesn't trust. It feels put upon by the slaves that it's enslaved. It feels always jealous of its authorities and always protective, and never has a capacity to celebrate, to enjoy, to be elevated in terms of its own gratification. So I think that is a deep and profound, it's almost Freudian. I mean, he talks about dreams and about the kind of work that is done when we're in a dream state. And he describes the dreams of the tyrant and contrasts them with the dreams of a more principled person, and explains that for the one, the dreams are a fence line. They constrain and limit the range of action and effectiveness of bad thoughts, bad intentions, neuroses, etc. And for the other, they become realized. They're actually actualized through deliberate acceptance. The nightmares become the political reality. I think that's a very, very telling and compelling section. And I found that to be one of the more dramatic moments in the entire Republic.
But might you say then that that typifies unhappiness, and that happiness would be kind of the opposite of all those things?
Well, he has a discussion about that too. He talks about, the idea that happiness is simply the, what shall I say, the abrogation of those threats and fears, that it's not a positive and creative state, that it's simply relief.
It's
that's
not,
kind of a gray, I'm sorry, please. I blither too much. Go ahead.
no, that's okay.
Anyway,
I was just going to say, it's not necessarily related to pleasure.
right. Well, the remarkable thing is the diversity of issues, the diversity of topics, the insights and profound anticipations of subsequent thinking in the Western tradition that are laid out here. I mean, it's a hodgepodge. It's not coherent and systematic in any way, but it is so rich. It's like sitting down in front of a freshly opened box of chocolates, and every one that you pick out of the box and take a bite of is a wonderful surprise. And maybe there's no coda, maybe there's no coherent map for what to eat next or how the pieces fit together, but everyone in and of itself is a joy. And if there were 1, 2, 3, or 4, it would be a great work of Western literature. But there are hundreds. I mean, every place that you step, and every time that you finish one chapter and open another, there are more of these Easter eggs of insight to be opened, explored, and enjoyed.
We should
Treat.
we
I
should
mean,
somehow.
and you can't do this just once and understand it all. I mean, this is a book that needs to be read over and over. I'm looking forward to reading it next time because I'm sure I'll find much more than I did the first.
We should give such a box to Lance.
I don't know. I think I have moral diabetes, perhaps, in connection with this.
Well, maybe Ron could just give one or two of those little bits to Lance.
This is an anecdote quickly told at a recent reunion of a small number of us who came back to our 65th high school reunion at a prep school in Connecticut, Taft School, and we were reflecting upon who were our mentors, teachers with whom we lived. I mean, we lived on the same corridors with them and their families and ate dinner and breakfast with them, and we knew them well. So the question on the floor was, who did we respect and like the best? And then somebody asked, well, who do you think had the happiest life? And it stunned us. And one fact was, we discovered in the conversation, we had the annual book and flipped through the pictures of all the professors, 95% of whom served in World War II, some in World War I. And we were stunned by the fact that they had all been veterans. But the question about, who was happy made us all speechless, looking back over 65 years. Anyway, the process was, I couldn't help but think about, when I'm reading Plato, that experience about how you have to sift through all these filters to address any of those questions. And one of the great benefits for the class, the book, and forced questionings is query, what insights did you gain? Well, hello, it's not possible to distill it. It's as we've talked about, it's an ongoing process, and it's fun. But that was just a little example.
A great question.
Mm-hmm.
Did you come to a decision, Charles?
On some, yes, as a fact, in fact, there were some consensus that X or Y or Z was probably had concluded their lives with a great deal of satisfaction, and from their teaching careers, from the way they seemed to have aligned what they said with what they did. So there was some external perception that was useful, but the process of conversation about it was just beyond words delightful. I didn't appreciate it at the moment. Now that I've had read this book for the first time and had these conversations with you all, thank you. I understand better what was going on in terms of our stumbling around the questions.
It may be that for those teachers of yours, living in a dorm with a bunch of adolescent boys wasn't the high point of their lives.
I'm sure it wasn't.
What comes to me clearly is that Socrates had a great deal of joy in entering into these dialogues with his various protagonists. I mean, there's playfulness, there are allusions to things outside of the Republic that are joyous. I mean, he has a playful imagination. The change in register, the use of these myths and allegories and references, it's also playful. He has a playful mind. He has a playful spirit, and it's on display here. It adds the what you call it, the theatrical context in which the Republic is written. It is, in a sense, a comedy. It's joyous. It has an uplifting lift and lilt. It's not moralizing. It's not defeating. It's not suppressing. It's got moments of tragic drama. He certainly identifies things he doesn't approve with some force, but for the most part, I think the register is a comedic one. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I can agree with that in retrospect in part, but I don't ever remember laughing.
I don't.
Even in his, I found myself laughing in his engagement with Thrasymachus. You didn't?
Yeah, that's a playful interaction. Here's the guy who's the opposite end of the spectrum, and there's nothing disdainful or hateful about that dialogue. I mean, it's accepting, it's absorbing, it's influencing, but there's nothing didactic about it. There's nothing hard-edged. It's all soft. It's all empathy and didactic jujitsu. It is funny, and I love his relationship with his stepbrother, if that's Gaukow's relationship. I mean, and there's the progress.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's Plato's. It's actually Plato's
brother. Okay, and so yeah, I mean, there are dramatic moments, and for the most part, they're positive, uplifting, and ascending. People move their moral center from where they started at the beginning of the dialogues to a place that Plato's influenced, and by and large, they're upward toward the sun and toward a more principled and moral perspective. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty about what precisely that means, but part of it means this ascension, as we've discussed earlier. It's the process. It's the climbing up toward the sun. It's aspirational. It's hard work.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt you. I want to get back to Tony. I wondered, Tony, if you wanted anyone to respond to what you had so thoughtfully written out.
Not really and specifically, Forrest. They were just thoughts that I gathered to work my way through the weeds of all of the detail and the deductive reasoning that goes into the Republic. And I just wanted to share with you after I received your emails about what we thought of and what we derived from the class.
Okay. Lee, did you have anything to contribute?
No, except to say that this has been a wonderful experience and the kind of thing I love to conduct as I could with economics students. Not the high level thinking here, but what some of the great economists had to say about life in the world. Anyway, congratulations to all of you for your wonderful, exciting experience.
Well,
I would like to know what kind of chocolates Ron has, because I need to get some of them.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I wish this was in person so we could share those chocolates.
Yeah. I think Forrest Gump wasn't
Yes.
life a box of chocolates.
Yes.
That's right.
You never know which one you're going to get.
Yeah, right. Forrest, does Plato never writes himself into a Socratic dialogue, does he?
No,
No.
never. No.
He uses his brothers, etc., but not himself.
Yeah.
Or references to himself or anything. No.
No.
Okay.
No. He and he always has Socrates until toward the end in his writing. Excuse me, I'm sorry. And we got to think of him as doing writing these things over a period of 40 years. So in his later writing, he drops the character Socrates. He has a person called the Athenian. So he's, but actually, or almost all of them, it's Socrates, and we have to figure out how much of it is Socrates and how much of it is Plato thinking.
Right. Well, you mentioned Socrates as preeminently a teacher, a founder of a school of philosophy.
No, yeah, Plato.
Plato.
Yeah.
Did Plato? Should we assume that Plato used these Socratic dialogues that his students would somehow read or listen to these dialogues as a teaching tool?
Now we just can't know, but it seems likely that either he would have done that or he would have conversed with his students about the issues that he was thinking about, and then maybe drew from that and went back and wrote about that. We just don't know what the process was, but certainly he was certainly involving his students in their classes, and you just can't imagine, given the model of Socrates, you can't imagine that he was lecturing. He must have been doing the sort of thing that we're struggling to do.
Aristotle was very different, was he not?
And Aristotle, quite different. Yeah, and here Aristotle is one of his prized students, and Aristotle must have been arguing against Plato in the class, because he has quite a different viewpoint. A lot of scholars say there's Plato and there's Aristotle, and it's like oil and water. I mean, they don't mix. There are not many things that you can find in Aristotle that are clearly reflections of Plato, except in opposition to Plato.
Yeah, I felt like, and now that you say that, I would have liked to have heard that dialogue, because Plato's brothers keep saying, yes, of course, Socrates, over and over again. When somebody might have said, no, Socrates, you're way off on that.
Right. And I can imagine that Aristotle would have spoken up. We don't think of him as being a shy person. And he became the tutor of the younger Alexander. So he was pretty high flown. He was in high circles himself. And he went on to do a lot of biological studies. He studied fish and other sea creatures, and we don't get much of biology in Plato. Later on, we do get more astronomy, but nothing like the biology of Aristotle.
This would be a good place to make a plug for some Aristotle in a future class.
Yeah.
The ethics would be a very logical follow-up, I think, to.
Okay, I was thinking of making up a list, as I did a few years ago, of other options that you might be interested in. So I will be doing that, and I'll send it all out to you and some other people to see if you would like to brave something like this again.
Yes.
Yeah, I would support the idea of Aristotle. There's a lot of very interesting ethical issues that he addresses. I mean, that still resonate today. I know if you're raised Catholic, the concept of backsliding, of which is the idea that you claim to believe something and yet you don't do it. That is still a very hot issue. It's a hot issue among Christian fundamentalists. The idea, once you're saved and then you go out and commit sin after having been saved, were you really saved or not? I mean, these issues go back to Aristotle. It's his science unfortunately throttled science for almost 1,000 years. I mean, he was so accepted in science that it ended up inhibiting scientific research. But ethics is a different matter. I think ethics is a more lively current kind of issue with him.
Yeah, I agree.
Okay, well, we'll see if you are brave enough to go in that direction. We'll try to keep Lance hanging in with us. So maybe it's an appropriate time to close. Again, I want to thank all of you for really what you've done to make, I mean, I keep learning from our discussions and going back and rereading passages. So thank you to all of you, and hope to see you again down the road.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you, Forrest.
Thank you very much.
Great course.
Great class. Thank you, everyone.
Indeed.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Nice to
Good.
meet you.
Yes.
Thank you for your insights. Bye-bye.
Cool.
Bye.
Bye.